Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. Who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And who is he? Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer. And what he do? And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers, board-certified criminal defense lawyer, and today we're reacting to the latest news in the Alex murder case. Yeah, the Alex Murdaugh homicide, a double homicide case. But before we get to the latest goings-on in that trial, this episode is brought to you by eSign.com. eSign.com. eSign.com is an effective way to remotely do business. Let's say you have a power of attorney, or you have any kind of sales agreement, any kind of agreement of rental agreement, any kind of agreement whatsoever, anything you need to have a signature. I use it all the time in my practice when the client can't come into the office. I just email them a retainer agreement, download the app, you get 3 free signatures a month, and it is just an effective way to and quick way, because you don't lose business that way. Sometimes when you do business, you have to act now. And eSign.com makes you so you can act now and preserve your business. So that's eSign.com. Use it, because we do. Now, where are we at in this trial? So the defense is rested, and they had an expert, and the expert testified about a bunch of stuff, about blood splatter, about 2 firearms, and his opinion that there was more than one shooter. So when the defense rests, what's next? Well, the state has the right to do rebuttal. I don't like this. Each side should just present their own thing, but the plaintiff always has a right of rebuttal. So the plaintiff went last, and that is the state. So the state of South Carolina, through their prosecutors, goes last. And so they can, but their rebuttal has to be something, witnesses that directly address things that were brought up by the defense. They can't just retry their whole case. Otherwise, that would be improper. The other thing that the judge is letting the jury do today is the judge is letting them do a site visit, basically a viewing of where the murders happened and the property. I don't know to what extent they're going to be able to go. I'm sure they're not going to be able to go in the house, but they'll be able to see the spatial difference between the dog kennels and the actual house and how far that was, and also the spatial arrangements of the kennels and how tight quarters these were, which makes a big difference for the defense expert. So let's get into the testimony of their expert.
The pellets coming out of here now would have definitely begun to spread, and you would have seen pellets all across the side of his left side of his face, which you didn't. And then finally, if you look at this angle here again, imagine door here, gun in this thing, then even if, and I think there's no evidence of it, but even if the shot could go through Paul's head and create an exit pathway, then that would project whatever pellets and bone matter that way. Whereas, if you move the shooter to the other side and we shoot into Paul downward this way, then all of this material comes back at the shooter, but also it's going this way into that upper corner, which is where we see the pellet defects and the heavy blood and the hair.
So basically what he's saying is if it's shot down like this, like in the angle that he assumes that it is, there'd be blowback. So in other words, there'd be splatter and bone matter and other kinds of things on the person who's shooting. And we don't have any of that.
Mr. Palmbach, let's talk a little bit about the reconstruction of murder of Maggie Murdaugh. Did you...
Now keep in mind, there were 2 different firearms. There's a shotgun and one that shoots a 300 blackout.
Assess the crime scene as it relates to her.
I did.
And what your observations?
Well, generally, there's a couple really key observations. One, all of her wounds were facing the direction of the shooter. So at all times during this, her shooting, she's facing the shooter. Now, she is moving, for sure. There is some degree of movement, from where the initial shooting most likely occurred, which is, we can't give you an accurate estimation for that. We can give you a really good estimation where it ended, and that's where we find her. and I'll talk about which wounds were associated with that in a minute. But you have her facing the attacker the entire time. At no point did she turn or blade or anything other than face him, and moved a little bit in the area, although not much.
So if somebody's facing you and they're not turning away, what does that tell you about the person? Does it mean that they knew them and then maybe they're pleading with them?
And then the shooter, based on the overall distribution of the shell casings, also moved, again, somewhat, moving, toward where the ultimate location where we find Maggie.
I'm going to show you two photos.
Now keep in mind, or keep an eye out and watch Alex Murdaugh's face as this testimony is going on. Because the jury's watching him like a hawk.
Defense Exhibit 163 and 164, and ask if you relied upon those.
I did.
Defense Exhibit 163 and 64 in evidence at this time.
No objection.
Committed. If you don't mind pulling out 163, Doug.
And it looks like, if you look at the monitor right in front of Alex Murdaugh, looks like they've got a piece of cardboard over it, which probably means he doesn't want to see the picture.
Jury's seen this, but just give us an overview of what this is.
Well, so Maggie is underneath the blanket there, and she's in a face-down position there.
Just leave it like that.
Her head is more toward us, and her feet are pointing more toward, I think what's been identified as a doghouse. You'll see placards in the foreground, 3 and 4, which are two of the blackout 300 casings. You'll see a placard 12, which is over on the grass, more in alignment. We're heading more toward.
When you have a semi-automatic firearm, it spits out the casings after it shoots. So you shoot the gun, it rocks another round in the chamber. As it does that, it spits out the used casing. So that's how you know what kind of firearm or what kind of bullet was used.
Maggie's head area, and that was a large piece of what appears to be brain-like material. And while you can't see the numbering, there are additional placards to the left, immediately to the left side. Well, they're on Maggie's right side, but as we view the photograph, they're to the left of where she's currently located. So this just gives us some general orientation of approximate locations of the shooter, and certainly.
Because when those casings come out of the gun, they don't go that far, so you can kind of maybe do a small area where you think the shooter probably was.
Where at least the fatal shot to Maggie was taken.
Right. I'm going to show you Defense Exhibit 149. And the other two we'd move to those be under seal, and 149 under seal. Is this you rely upon this in reaching your conclusions?
I did.
Your Honor, we move. Exhibit 194, not 149. 194 in the evidence under seal at this time.
No objection.
And when you move something under seal, that means it's not open to the public. So the court has a record, right? And everything that goes into the court record generally is public. But if you do something under seal, it is not for public view.
You mentioned the marker 12 a moment ago and 163. And again, what do you understand 12 to be?
It's physiological material. I mean, it looks structurally like brain material, but it's tissue.
In your opinion, would the shooter of Maggie have any blood spatter, blood, biological material on him or her?
I think it's possible. I think it's possible because, as we're seeing here, that you have a projection of brain material backwards toward the direction of where the shooter would have been located. We also have a couple of the shots, the left thigh shot and the abdomen shot, which have been identified as having stippling around them. But
Now, stippling is basically a contact wound. The significance of it is the proximity of the firearm to the target. So if I have stippling in my chest, that means somebody put a firearm right up to my chest and fired the gun. And so it's a round burn mark. We'll show you a copy of what stippling is here in a second. But it's a round burn mark that kind of indicates a close contact shot.
Issue of being stippling, that does make it an intermediate distance, and that's going to move the shooter in anywhere from, I would agree. I think Dr. Einstein said a foot to 3 feet is probably a good approximation.
Because when you have, and it's from the flames that come out of the end of the barrel. So a foot to 3 feet, when you have an assault rifle that's shooting in blackout 300 or 300 blackout, you could get a contact wound, that is out that far. And one of the things that's good when you have your own expert is where he can agree with certain things that the state has said, because then if there's no disagreement, okay, so we agree on these parts, and this guy just seems credible. He doesn't seem grandiose. He doesn't seem like he's full of shit and just a hired gun.
Mr. Palmbach, do you have an opinion based upon more probably than not, whether there was one or two shooters who murdered Maggie and Paul on the night of June 7th?
I do have an opinion on that.
And what's your opinion?
My opinion is the totality of the evidence is more suggestive of a two-shooter scenario.
Now, if you have the totality of the evidence is more suggestive of a two-shooter scenario, what does that mean? Was Alex one of the shooters? Or was it the random person? And if both are equally likely to be true, which we don't know that that's the case, or the jury's thinking that, then the presumption of innocence hasn't been overborne. So where you have two theories of a case, one consistent with innocence and one consistent with guilt, but both equally likely to be true, you have to favor the one that, because you have the presumption of innocence, you have to favor that one.
And please explain the basis of your opinion.
Okay. So we'll also go back to Paul. In Paul's scenario, we know where the shooter of the shotgun had to be, and that would have been orientated really directly over Paul's head. And we also got a chance to see what was the effect of this dynamic explosion in the contact. And you can see outside and even in throughout the feet area in multiple and many large pieces of skull. We also saw large amounts of tissue that were projected all the way up onto the ceiling and the door.
So it was a really violent explosion of Paul's skull. And when you have that, and the purpose of him bringing this up is that whoever shot him would have some material on him.
The hair all the way up into the door, and of course you see blood literally everywhere within there. And finally, you see the pellets. Some of the pellets are on that same pathway, and they had enough inertia to either or dent the door and put themselves up and stick into the casing. All of that activity was in direct alignment with the shooter. And so I think minimally, that shooter is getting covered with this material, getting more or less the shock wave of that effect, and more than likely getting hit with at least something that could have done injury, a bone.
So basically, he's firing down, you're getting this blowback, and some of it might have even been some of the pellets, some of the BBs from the shotgun shell. So when you're talking about these two different types of projectiles, you've got a shotgun shell and a 300 blackout. 300 blackout is kind of like a 223. It's a round that has a metal bullet with a brass casing that's got gunpowder in it. So you hit the gunpowder and the one bullet goes out. A shotgun shell usually has a plastic casing and it's all packed in there with gunpowder and then some BBs or pellets. It doesn't shoot just one single bullet. What it does, a shotgun shell shoots a spray of pellets. and this happened at close range. So that's what he's saying, is that some of these pellets would blow back to him.
Or I think that particular shooter, for a brief period of time, is kind of out of this. It's not as if they can instantaneously suffer that, drop the shotgun, run to wherever the the blackout rifle is, pick that up, and then in any kind of a reasonable time period engage in a meaningful assault, an effective assault, able to shoot straight and make hits.
So this posits, three different scenarios, in my opinion. Alex did this with somebody else. Alex hired somebody to do this, or some random people just came and did this. Now, keep in mind that Alex admitted already to hiring somebody to try to kill him. And so does it out of the realm that he would hire somebody to do this? I don't know.
So that, I think, is one of the major indicators of concern. I think the other things to consider is that all of this is very temporal. It's very close. I know when I looked at the photographs versus being there, I'm like, it is much closer together than it looks like in the photo. So it is
that right there, that statement right there, it's much closer than it looks like in the photos. I guarantee you the judge probably relied on some of that when the defense asked for a viewing of the kennels.
Very close. With Paul, as I articulated, I believe he was shot first. I believe he had no idea it was coming. And he took the shot to the chest and very soon thereafter, the one in the back of his head. Anybody in the near proximity to that, if Maggie had been anywhere in that area walking around down there, she would have heard that. And her response would have been in the direction of the shooter or the activity, or run, or do something different. So I think that the temporal location suggests that these things more probable than not happen fairly quickly, and that the individual who shot first with the shotgun minimally was stunned, probably blood and material in his eyes, and maybe have been injured, and would have taken some degree of time to recover. And lastly, I think there is just more or less in the.
Let me just tell you, representing somebody like Alex Murdaugh would be very difficult, because you're dealing with a smart guy because he's a lawyer. He's also a narcissist, and he does anything he can do to save his ass. And he's probably going to be dictating, which way the defense goes quite a bit.
Anybody who deals with firearms, a logical argument here. Why would one shooter bring two long rifles, two long weapons to the event? You can't handle and shoot two of them. So you either got to put one down, use one, and then swap out and grab the other one. Or I suppose you could have one on a sling, but that's quite awkward, and it's slipping around and it's banging around in an environment we know is very, very tight. Finally, if one of the weapons is the Blackout 300, well, that comes with a high magazine capacity. My research of that showed that the Palmetto State Armory upper, which we don't know, we have no idea what gun this is because it hasn't been identified. But if the state, I think, has alluded to that, if that's the case, then a weapon that had that Palmetto State Armory in a 300 Blackout, a person could purchase a 10-round capacity clip, a 20-round capacity clip, or a 30-round capacity.
And think about that. That does make sense. I mean, if you have a 300 Blackout or like an AR-15 kind of weapon, and you're firing, you wouldn't need to have a shotgun. So it is suggestive of two people there.
Where I live in Connecticut, we are really restricted on what kind of weapons we can have and what kind of clips we could have. We'd have to, even if we could have an AR, which is very restrictive, we'd have to get a 10-round clip. Other than that, it wouldn't make sense for anybody to buy a 10-round clip when you could buy a 20 or 30. But having said that, if it was a 10-round clip, there were only 8 shots fired. You still had 2 more to go, and you could have more than not easily reloaded. So to me, there's structurally difficult for the same shooter to have 2 long arms.
So did you hear that? So 8 shots were fired out of that assault rifle. 8 shots. Somebody wanted, against somebody who was unarmed. Somebody wanted somebody dead. Period.
and no practical reason for that to happen. Add that to what I believe happened to the shooter who fired first with the shotgun, and I think it tips in favor of the probability of two shooters.
Mr. Palmbach, the person who shot Paul, was he or she standing in the feed room at least 1 foot?
Yes.
Was there an opportunity to do a footprint analysis to illuminate more clearly the existence of footprints there?
For sure. I mean, all of us, several, I could.
And this is a criticism of the investigation, that they had their man, so they didn't look for anybody else, and they didn't do a full investigation by analyzing footprints that may or may not have been there.
For myself, and I believe others have opined about this, including some of the analysts in the case, there are what appear to be partial footprints in blood in the feed room and on the cement around it. And while I'm not a footwear pattern expert, I can generally recognize what appears to be footwear or partial footwear impressions. I would agree with that. But in order to go beyond it's a general pattern to something more specific, that generally what you do, and I've done this countless times, is you spray enhancement reagents on them. And you spray a reagent, we generally call them blood pattern enhancer reagent, or you could even use a straight protein spray.
So this is a common tactic of the defense when you attack the investigation. And because you're saying that, well, not everything was exhausted. And if there was the potential for footprints belonging to somebody else that didn't belong to the defendant, well, you have to take that into account.
Black would be an example of one of those. And by spraying those reagents in the area, it reacts with the presence of blood or proteins, and it brings up the transformation. It gives you a lot more clarity, a lot more detail, and you can tell an awful lot more about a particular footwear pattern. Absolutely should have been done in this case. And I also believe, second to that, you had a lot of dirt in the immediate area that should have had at least partial footwear impressions, and I saw no indication of any attempt to either look for it, photograph it, properly photograph.
And that goes to the theory that, you rushed to judgment. You had your guy, you figured out who this was, or at least you thought you did, and so you didn't need to do a full investigation. And that can be kind of powerful stuff.
Or analyze it.
And thank you. One moment, y'all.
That's the direct examination of the defense expert. I watched the cross of the defense expert. I don't think she really touched him at all. One of the things that they do, you've been paid by so-and-so and you're making so much money and blah, you're being hired by the defense and most of your cases are defense and, but then you try to pick out where they disagree. And but I thought that defense expert did a really good job of positing a scenario that pointed away from the defendant. Stay tuned because we're going to continue to follow this. There's other developments. We'll have parts 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 of the rest of the trial. And we'll give you some good in-depth analysis. This was a really good glimpse into the defense expert. And you can see the testimony wasn't that long. And one of the things the defense lawyer has to do, and actually prosecutors have to do this too, you have to be well-versed in the science. You have to be able to talk the talk. You have to be able to walk the jury, through your expert and go through the science, and you have to know just as much as the expert does because you got to be able to cross-examine somebody on the fly and you got to be able to put your case in and you have to understand the evidence. So this is Bruce Rivers. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, sign up for Patreon, and we'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts.
Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. Bruce Rivers just broke down your case. He know all the charges that you about to face. You ain't coming home till 2058. That self-snitching gon' get you put away. 23-hour lockdown, please, is that my God.